It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience.
Hey again, everybody. How's it going? Today we're going to be talking about how a bill becomes a law. Before we do that, I just want to apologize really briefly. If you hear any snoring, that's actually my dog who's like right below the desk right here, laying on my feet. He's a really bad snorer, and for whatever reason, today he's decided that he wants to help me make this video. So apologies for any noises coming from him. Let's talk a little bit about this idea of going through the process of going from a bill that is created by somebody in Congress, put into the hopper, and then going all the way through this entire system and coming out as a law that has the full essentially force of the entire United States government behind it, and is able to compel individuals to change their political behavior, right? So if you recall, in the first video, we had this little Schoolhouse Rock jingle going on. It was a lot of fun. That video is interesting. The one thing that it really did get right, maybe it got some things wrong, but the first thing that it got right is that this legislative process is long and complicated. And it's no wonder that Bill, our little Bill guy, was so tired, sitting on the Capitol steps, because he has a long journey, essentially, from the beginning, this idea the legislator has in their mind, to this final process of becoming a law. So the first thing we need to think about is that bills begin through sponsorship of legislation. So again, this idea that a legislator, the Schoolhouse Rock video, and again, I'll link it in the module so you can see the whole thing. It begins because I guess some citizens were concerned about stop signs or something. I don't even remember what the specific issue was, but the legislator hears the constituents and goes to Congress with this issue in mind. That may or may not be the way that it works. Sometimes members of Congress are attempting to fulfill some of the wishes of a president, for example, by sponsoring a specific bill. Other times, groups of legislators are getting together and thinking about these things, and they've decided that they're going to co-sponsor a piece of legislation. Regardless of how it happens, but really the first stage here of a bill becoming law is by one or a number of legislators putting their name on a bill, and again putting it into this hopper, so to speak, introducing the bill on either the House or the Senate floor. At this point, we could have additional co-sponsors that could say, hey, I want to be part of this, put my name down. We'll talk about, in our class discussion about why members of Congress might be so eager to put their name on certain bills. But regardless of what happens in terms of that rationale, the speaker or the presiding officer, whoever's in charge of that respective session of the Senate or the House of Representatives, is then going to assign that bill to a committee for committee discussion. And so that is, again, this is where most of the work happens in both the Senate or the House of Representatives. It's going to go to a committee where there's going to be essentially a lot of study, where members of Congress are going to think very carefully about all the implications of the text of this bill. And so committee debate can happen. We can have hearings. We could have subcommittees that are going to then report, do even more detailed work and then report back to the larger committee. In the House, for example, the Rules Committee, can also determine how debate is going to function there, Again, in the Senate, we have open debate, but in the House, we want to determine whether to give the entire House of Representatives more or less time to debate the bill. There's also the process of markup, which is essentially where that bill, we got this rough draft. Maybe the bill, they start to learn a lot of things through their investigations and their committee work, and they end up changing the text of the bill so much to match the realities of what's happening on the ground that they go back and they have to essentially start over. And so again, if this markup happens, it's usually happening because they're seeking public comment, for example. They might get experts on the issues in there to testify before the committees. So that's actually a really interesting process whereby Congress tries to reach out to some of these subject matter experts. I know people who are professors of political science and of other disciplines who have testified before Congress about specific issues, and in some cases, they're what they've said, look, I'm an expert on whatever this is. I'm an expert on voting rights. I'm an expert on any kind of topic. I'm an expert on in some cases it might even just be writing or some educational reform. I'm an expert in education. And I don't think that you're thinking about this properly. Here's my take. you'll actually see that in many cases Congress does listen to those experts, and they end up changing the text of these things through markup. So much so, in many cases, they have to start over. So if this bill, right, doesn't get marked up so much that it totally changes its form, becomes a totally new bill, it can then make it out of committee potentially through a simple majority vote by the committee, and then will get placed on the House or the Senate calendar, again, wherever it's beginning. So again, if it started its life in the House, at this point it's only gone through House institutions, and now it's going to go on the House calendar. If it started in the Senate, it's going to go all the way through the Senate, and then now it's on the Senate calendar. And then finally, we're going to have floor debate. One thing I do want to mention is these committees, regardless of the branch of Congress in which the committee system is working, all the committees have majorities that are consistent with the majority party of the entire chamber. And by that I mean that if this is going through the House Ways and Means Committee, that means that at the present moment, that committee has a majority of Democrats. If it's going through, some Senate committee, right, the Senate Agricultural Committee, that means that a Republican is going to have the tiebreaker vote. They're going to be a majority of Republicans on that committee. So it could be 4-3. It could be 7-6. It could be any number of an odd number of committee members. But regardless, right? Usually this committee work is, again, the vote is going to happen and the majority is going to come out, and it's going to be a partisan bill. So don't make the mistake in thinking that the committee system is like this nonpartisan thing. It's also quite partisan. And then finally, right, floor debate is going to happen, again, in that partisan way. And in the Senate, again, this is unstructured. One of the big pieces that we need to think about here is that the Senate, because of its unstructured debate, means that on the Senate floor, that's where additional riders and amendments can happen. Whereas in the House, as we saw earlier when we were thinking about House rules, there's only specific kind of rules where new changes to the bill can be introduced. So again, I think this really speaks to the fact, once again, that it's super important to be on committees. And that's one of the big things that motivates members of Congress. You want to have a good committee assignment. And of course, who's going to assign the committees? It's going to be the leadership of the party that you serve on, right? So if you're a Democrat in the House of Representatives, you are going to be going to Nancy Pelosi and you're going to be going to that House leadership, including, for example, Steny Hoyer, who's actually an important Democrat in the House of Representatives, somebody who actually is part of Maryland's delegation to the House of Representatives. Regardless, if you're a Democrat in the House, you're looking to that leadership to assign you to a committee where you can be of the most use, and that maybe you have some content knowledge. If you're a Republican in the House, you're looking to Kevin McCarthy, you're saying, hey, make sure that I get a good committee position. And a lot of times that gets broken down both by content knowledge, the kinds of stuff that your constituents care about. So if you're from Iowa, like, yeah, sure, you're going to be on an agriculture committee or something, right? And it's also determined partially by seniority, right? So the juiciest committee positions usually go to people who have been in the House or the Senate for a long time. So again, where were we in the bill process, right? It made it out of committee. It gets on the calendar. Floor debate happens. It could be amended again. But finally, what's going to happen is, regardless of which one it passes in, if it finally finishes its process in the House, it goes to the Senate. If it finishes in the Senate, it goes to the House. And again, we saw that this bill, right, if there's a threat of filibuster, the bill can fail in the Senate, right? And it may need a 60% majority instead of a simple majority to be able to pass. At this point, committee action, floor debate, the whole shebang, everything we discussed earlier starts happening again in the other chamber. So it's gone all the way through the process in one chamber, and now it's going to start the process over and go all the way through the process in the other chamber. And again, changes can be made. And then finally, if the bill passes by a simple majority in this next chamber, even with some substantial changes, it then will move to the conference committee. So this is where the House and the Senate come together and join forces to try to get this final version of the bill created. And so again, if it changes too much, then it may mean that the bill has to start over because it's irreconcilable. But if the amendments that have been made in the second chamber, either the House or the Senate, whichever got it last, aren't so huge, that means that the conference committee can do its work. And so original committee members come together with some senior members of the House and the Senate to square this bill. They try to make sure that the spirit of both chambers' kind of ideas about the legislation are more or less the same. They get that down to a single version, and then they give that back, right, to both chambers for approval. And they say, okay, make sure that this marked up the conference committee version of the bill is to your approval. And then finally, once it's done that, it gets to head to the desk of the President of the United States. So then it moves from the legislature, which again, everything we've been talking about in this system is in the legislature. It moves away from the Capitol building and it goes to the White House. And now it moves into the executive branch, right? That Article 2 power that we have talked about. And the president gets the option to either kill that bill, right, anyway, or sign it into law and put his or her signature on it. And of course, the last check that we've just mentioned in a previous module is that Congress may have accidentally passed a bill into law that is expressly unconstitutional, and it's up to the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution and make that determination. And if they do make that determination through a Supreme Court ruling that the bill that was just passed is in fact unconstitutional, then that bill no longer holds the force of law and it's scrapped. So the thing that Schoolhouse Rock gets wrong is that, it's a very happy little song about this guy, the little Bill, marching to Washington and, he hopes and prays that one day he'll be a law, right? But I think that the Schoolhouse Rock video should probably be set to some kind of like death metal, right? Where, this bill is getting slaughtered, has no chance, right, of making it through Congress. This should be a much more dire. The bill should be really, afraid for its existence, because the likelihood that it dies in committee, likelihood that it dies on the floor of the Senate, especially because of the filibuster rule, likelihood that the president vetoes it, all these different checks throughout that system mean that very, very, very few pieces of original legislation get passed into law. So we have a system that is extremely gridlocked. By that I mean that it's very difficult to accomplish much of anything in terms of actually passing new laws. And so that, I think, is a really important question that we need to contend with, is how does this work, right? How does this work and how does this fail to work? And I think in our future discussions of Congress and our future discussions in our class discussion, I think one of the questions that we want to answer is what happens then if it's so difficult to pass legislation? Why is it that this is so difficult? And if it is so difficult, what are some of the possible solutions to a very, very gridlocked system? So I'd leave it to you to think about that until we meet, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts about this very complicated system. If this is feeling like a lot, don't worry, it absolutely is. I suggest that you go back to the textbook. I suggest that you read the diagrams and the charts for how this stuff works. Don't get too hung up in the details though, right? Let's think about the substantive. Let's think about the who gets what, right? The idea of who actually has the power in these scenarios. I think the biggest thing to take away from this is that when a gridlocked Congress is fighting over legislation, somebody else is going to start to take the mantle away from Congress in terms of their ability to act. And who that could be, well, I leave it up to you to think about. So have a wonderful week, and I'll see you during our next discussion. So long.